Whoa, no intro. We're live.
Oh, okay. Well, welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty, where we are bringing you the people and the organizations fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. And today we have a special guest with us. We have Scott Horton, and he is the director of the Libertarian Institute. He also wears several other hats. He has his own podcast radio show, the Scott Horton Show, and he also plays a pivotal role in antiwar.com as well. So he is definitely a pivotal figure in the liberty movement. But before we get to talking to him, I want to introduce you to the rest of the panel. In our upper left-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. And on our lower left-hand corner, we have our screaming eagle of freedom, Tim Everett. He is a pilot in the state of California. In our upper right-hand corner, we have Scott Horton with us. And my name's Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host. Scott, let me bring up the page real quick, just so I can let everybody know where to go to see more of your stuff, so I don't forget during the show. But here is Scott Horton's page for his radio show. You can see that at scotthorton.org. You also have the libertarianinstitute.org, and we have antiwar.com, and so you can check those out as well. So Scott, how did you get, I guess, so active in the liberty movement in all these areas?
I guess it's my comparative advantage, complaining on the radio about things. I've been into radio since, I was a very troublesome caller to the local radio hosts here in Austin, back in the 90s. And I got a show of my own starting in about 1998. At the very end of 1998, I started a little pirate radio show here in Austin on Free Radio Austin. And then, I've always really been good on everything, I guess. But then W. Bush came and started the terror wars. So I really started plowing around with antiwar.com, Justin Raimondo and Eric Garris and Alan Bach and Matt Barganier and that whole great crew there. And I guess, like if you go back and check my show archives, at first I was kind of interviewing people about like, oh, well, what's the libertarian answer to environmentalism, or what's the libertarian answer to this or that? But I got bored of all that stuff real quick and just started focusing mostly only on foreign policy and working with antiwar.com.
How did you get interested in the libertarian movement? Because this is one of those things where, we find that everybody has kind of a different story and a different path to it, because you certainly don't pick it up through the public education and the government run schools,
Yeah.
unless it's examples of what not to do.
Yeah. In Austin, there's always been a real strong libertarian movement, and Libertarian Party, like Travis County Libertarian Party, has always been a very active group. And so they had a show on, there were various libertarian shows on the Access Channel. And of course, Harry Brown ran in 96 when I was just out of high school. And then Ron Paul went back to Congress in 97. He was reelected, he'd been gone for a while, but he was reelected in 96 and went back in 97. So I had Harry Brown and Ron Paul were two really great examples and leaders at that time. And, to tell you the truth, I really spent most of the 90s pounding around with right-wing militia guys and patriots and stuff, because at least they cared about the Branch Davidians. Whereas my understanding was, hey, no offense, reason, was that libertarians just wanted to talk about, I don't know what, why the government isn't really at fault for whatever it is that they're accused of, and I didn't really realize that there were hardcore libertarians out there like Jim Bovard on Waco and Lou Rockwell and all the guys at the Mises Institute on money and the business cycle and war and all that. I didn't start reading antiwar.com until about 99. And then, so that was when I realized that, oh, you really do have libertarians who are hardcore, who aren't just kids my age, but who are adults, but are like anarchists and hardcore anti-war, anti-imperialists and anti-war guys and stuff. So, that was when I, really kind of, I guess you could say, joined the movement. Basically was when I really started doing the show. In my interview show, I started in 2003. And my first interview was Alan Bach. He was from the Orange County Register, but also from antiwar.com. And I just decided really quickly that was my crew. Justin Raimondo, I don't know if you guys were reading Raimondo back then, if you know who that is, but certainly, go back 20 years ago, right now, the start of Iraq War II. In the lead up to that, and then really through at least the first half of Obama. Well, just leave it at W. Bush for a minute. During W. Bush, Justin was the most important writer in America, period. And if you care about anything that matters at all, you know what I mean? I don't know about fiction, literature and whatever, but in terms of public policy and all that, Raimondo was the best by far. Just he knew, he really, I think, doesn't get the credit for this, but I think he really did the most to popularize the term neocon as a pejorative for this weird little sect, the neoconservatives. And, he didn't coin the phrase or anything. They are a real thing. Norman Podhoretz even wrote a book about neoconservatism was the title of it. But I think it was Justin who was the one who made people hate neocons. You know who lied us into war? The neocons. You know why they did it? Israel. And who are these people? What do they want? And how does a group of 35 guys somehow edge Exxon and really the rest of Houston out of the way and inside the Republican Party and take over the Republican Party and take us to war? That was a huge
they almost,
and everyone on the left missed it, right? There's so few liberals who understood who's a neocon, what's a neocon, right? Like Michael Lind had written a great thing, but most liberals at the time were saying no war for oil, right? They just assumed that this was James Baker's war when it was the furthest thing from it. So,
it almost seems like I was just going to say, it almost seems like these neocons have now taken over the Democrat Party.
Well, that's where they're from. That's why they're called neocons, right? So neoconservative, it doesn't mean conservatives nowadays. It means new conservatives, and it applied to this group of mostly ex-Trotskyites and Cold War Democrats who had moved to the right in reaction to the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement of the 1960s. And especially because really the Vietnam era new left kind of hippies turn against Vietnam. They also did not support Israel in the 67 war. And so the neocons, they went to Scoop Jackson's office. He was the senator from Washington State. They called him the senator from Boeing. He was a right-wing Cold War Democrat, Harry Truman type Democrat. And then they moved to the Reagan administration. And they all, I don't know, 10 of them or something got jobs as deputy undersecretary of this and that in the Reagan years. And then W. Bush let Dick Cheney put them all throughout the government in order to, ram through Iraq War II.
So Scott, what is the philosophical basis of your anti-war positions?
What's the what part?
The philosophical basis.
Oh, the
of your
philosophical
anti-war
basis?
positions.
Well, I mean, if you want to get all libertarian doctrine about it, I mean, we all believe in non-interventionism and non-aggression. Sheldon Richman calls it the non-aggression obligation as opposed to the non-aggression principle. This is what social animals owe to each other, he says, is non-aggression. And libertarians, I think this is what makes us, great and a pain in everyone else's behind, is that we don't differentiate between the morality of individual humans and the state. So arrest is just kidnapping, and taxation is extortion, and conscription is slavery, and war is mass murder. So, I mean, if the French are sending a fleet of warships and we got to mass murder their sailors on the Atlantic, that's tough, I guess. They're all combatants and making themselves a problem, aggressing against us. But of course, that's never what's going on here. I mean, this is the era of the phony wars. America really won World War II. We won, took over the British, French, German, and the rest of the Western empires, really, and including the Japanese Empire. The Soviet Union and China got what was left, but America essentially inherited 2/3 of the planet. And then when the Soviet Union fell apart, they introduced this doctrine. So we'll tolerate no near-peer competitors. We will be the world empire, and we will not accept any challenge from any near-peer competitor at all. So in other words, if Russia and China try to combine together into a regional power strong enough to resist our will, we'll go to war against them first before we let that happen, which is what's happening now, really. I mean, this is what's going on. That you look at The wars of the last 20 years: Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Somalia, Libya, Syria, Yemen. Just shouldn't leave out Iraq again. Iraq War III and Yemen. I mean, these are all wars of aggression against people who didn't do anything to us whatsoever. The Taliban not only didn't attack us on September 11th, they tried to warn us that the attack was coming. America went not only regime changed them anyway, but let the actual bad guys go and regime changed them instead. And, waged all these wars this whole time ever since. So, it usually comes.
So Scott, I'm trying to understand something.
Sure.
I'm trying to understand something. Are there some wars we should fight and some wars we should not, or we should not be fighting any wars at all?
No, we should not be fighting any wars at all. I mean, people always just point at Adolf Hitler and World War II, but I think we all even learned this even in government school, right? That American entry into World War I is what caused World War II. World War I was ending as a stalemate. Every army was frozen, no boots, no ammo, done. The thing was over. It was literally peace without victory. Everybody lost, stalemate. And then what happens? Here come the Yankees and turn the entire thing in favor of the British and the French, who then, completely obliterate the Ottoman Empire, giving it to, the British expanded their empire by 1 million square miles, prolonging the war so that the interim Kerensky government in Russia, the revolutionary government, was overthrown and replaced by the communists on their 4th try after, Kerensky, the original Russian Revolution was in March 1917. The communists didn't take over till October. That was all because Woodrow Wilson bribed Kerensky to stay in the war, keep his soldiers at the front where they weren't available to protect his regime in St. Petersburg, and stay at the front, motivating the revolution and the people's tolerance of the revolution to end the war in Russia. And then, of course, allow Britain and France to strip Germany of all their outlying territories and institute the war reparations that caused the hyperinflation and of the 1920s and that destabilization, the original rise of the Nazi Party. And then through, and there's a great book by Jim Powell called Wilson's War, where he explains how Hitler began every speech denouncing what he called the traitors of 1918. And these were the Democrats, because Woodrow Wilson, instead of demanding that the militarists in Germany sign the armistice to end the war, he said, no, I'm, like a snob, I'm too good to sign a deal with some right-wing German militarists. I will only accept the signature of some properly elected Democrats. Well, so then who got the blame for the terrible treaty? The Democrats. And of course, the militarists were like, yeah, it was their fault. It wasn't us who got us into a war and then lost a war, right? And so this was how the Nazis came to be. So this American entry into World War I caused the rise of the Soviet Union, caused the rise of Nazi Germany, caused the massive expansion of the British Empire, and set the stage for World War II and then the entire American world empire ever since then. So, no, Woodrow Wilson should have done like Washington said and stayed home.
I think you would agree that part of libertarian philosophy requires us to believe in the rule of law. And our Constitution says that we can go to war when Congress declares as such. So are you saying that Congress should never declare war?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm saying just because they did declare a war, that doesn't make it right. If they don't declare war and the president goes to war anyway, well, that's definitely wrong. But, Congress can declare lots of things and be wrong all day. The reality is that war is only okay in self-defense. But as we all know, America is not threatened by any state on this planet. We have 2 weak and friendly neighbors to the north and south, and 2 gigantic oceans to our east and west. The only way an enemy could actually attack and hurt this country in any way would just be a surprise attack with 3-stage intercontinental ballistic missiles and thermonuclear weapons, in which case we'd blow them off the face of the earth, and the whole point is moot anyway. But meanwhile, not in 300 years is China going to build a fleet of troop ships and land in California. Not without getting shot to death. They're not. No one's coming. No one is coming. America is the world empire. That's why whenever I ask you to list our last 10 wars, they didn't take place anywhere near here.
Well, and that brings up an interesting point, Scott. And Leon, could you share screen real quick? Because I had a graphic that I was hoping we could get into, and this is one of them. So this is Al Jazeera put up this particular graphic, and it shows that we have, I mean, it looks more like an empire than anything else, really. I mean, 750 bases in 80 countries, 173,000 troops deployed in almost 60 countries. I didn't even know we had 160 countries. But I mean, this is, kind of the size and the scope of our military out here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like what you're saying is that we really don't have this threat, yet we are arming ourselves to the teeth as almost like this is going to happen tomorrow. Did you want to, kind of expand on this idea?
Yeah. So, I mean, just take the post-Cold War era, right? Since the end of the 1980s and the beginning of the 1990s, there's these three major areas of operation: the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and East Asia, right? And in all three cases, America's gone over there, got involved, picked a fight with the other side, and now talk about, oh no, look at the threat. So first and foremost, of course, is the Middle East. Bush Sr. went straight to the Middle East, launched a war, and then stayed at the bases in Saudi Arabia. Bill Clinton kept that policy, kept bombing Iraq from bases in Saudi for 8 years straight, for a total of 10, right? And in fact, W. Bush came another couple of years, year and a half of that. So, we're talking about 12 years of bombing. This is what caused September 11th. This is what turned Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan's mercenaries from the Afghan War of the 1980s. You've all seen Rambo 3. This is what turned them against us, is bombing Iraq from bases in Saudi. Then as soon as they attack our towers, then, guess what? Now we get to begin to intervene over there and have another generation of war in all of these countries in order to, supposedly increase our government's power and influence, and as they put it, military footprint over there, right? And all they do is just cause more and more terrorism. In fact, it's extremely lucky how little more terrorism they cause. When we had terrible attacks all across Europe and the United States, but nothing as disastrous as September 11th, luckily. But the more they fought, all they did was cause more and more chaos all throughout the region. In Europe, they promised not to expand the NATO military alliance, and then they just did it anyway. Bill Clinton added 3, W. Bush added 9, Obama added, I think, 3 more, and even Trump added 2 countries to NATO as they continue to expand. As W. Bush, Obama, I don't know if Trump reiterated this, but certainly Biden did, their promise that they would bring Georgia and Ukraine into NATO. This is no different. It is no different than if Ronald Reagan had spent us into oblivion in the 80s and we had lost the Cold War, and the Soviets had then expanded the Warsaw Pact to Western Europe, our former allies in Western Europe, and started expanding to the Caribbean and to Mexico. Overthrew the government of Canada twice when they kept voting wrong for the anti-Russian candidate, and then threatened to kick us out of our naval bases in Alaska, and started going to war against the people of Vancouver and British Columbia who wouldn't accept the rule of the new junta. What would America do in a situation like that? If Russia was overthrowing the government of Canada and threatening to kick us out of our naval bases and going to war against Canadians who refuse to accept the rule of their new illegal coup d'etat regime, we would invade Canada and, probably nuke Moscow, right? Probably go immediately just to war with Russia, skip Canada and just go to war with Russia. We wouldn't tolerate that for 1 second. And yet we expect them to just lie back and take it. We're angels and they're devils, but still, what are they going to do about it? Nothing. And then the same thing in Asia, where what do we have in the case of Taiwan? We have what's been agreed by even our government for the last 50 years since Nixon went over there in 72, 73 and agreed that Taiwan is part of China. It's a renegade province. It will be reunited with China someday. It's not an independent sovereign nation like Japan or South Korea. It's part of China. And we recognize that because as Nixon and Kissinger figured then, we don't care about Taiwan. Who cares about Taiwan? We have a much more important interest in being friends with China. So they threw Taiwan under the bus. That was the right thing to do. That helped keep the peace for the last 50 years. Now what are they doing? Especially under Joe Biden. You know, they say, oh, he's China Joe. Oh, he's such a sellout to Beijing. Really? Well, he's 3 times the China hawk that Donald Trump was. He's sailing our Navy up and down their coast in the Taiwan Straits and through the South China Sea, bomber flights, expanding our military footprint all throughout East Asia in the name of threatening China that they better not try it. Now, the deal always was that America says it's one China and they'll be reunited someday, we hope, peacefully. We're not promising that we will back Taiwan in a war. So Taiwan, you better not declare independence. But also China, we're heavily implying that we might back them in a war. So don't you attack them either. And let's figure out, but then what's the key? The key is they've got to be reunified peacefully somehow. So they're not reunified violently. But instead, Joe Biden gives them a war guarantee and says, no way, we'll protect their independence no matter what, except that they're 7,000 miles from here. And because Israel gave China America's best technology for our sea-skimming supersonic missiles, they can sink our ships. They can sink our carriers. They have missiles with a longer range than our F-18s. Well, what does that tell you? That means our aircraft carriers can't get anywhere near Taiwan in the event of a war with China. They keep red teaming this over and over again. Our sailors drown in a war with China. And there's no reason in the world to have this. And yet, what do we have? Just like Bill Clinton bombing Iraq from bases in Saudi. It's like pushing bin Laden, poking him in the chest, going, what are you going to do about it, dude? Knock our towers down? Huh? You're not going to do anything. And it's the same thing they keep saying in Ukraine. They say, if Russia loses completely in Ukraine, they might go crazy and resort to using nukes. And they go, we're doing everything we can to make sure that they completely lose in Ukraine. Okay, well, that doesn't sound very smart, does it?
Yeah.
You know, but this is their policy. They are madmen. And just look at them. Look at any one of these presidents and their spokesmen, their national security advisors, their secretaries of state. They all think they're right. They don't think for a minute that what they're doing is like taking advantage or being a bully or being a bad guy, whether it's W. Bush and Karl Rove or whether it's Obama and Biden or whatever. They are pure self-righteousness. All of their enemies are evil. All of their enemies are the bad guy, which means that they're the good guy and whatever they're doing is justified. And look at the way the Biden government talks about war with Russia right now. No matter what risk, their level of risk that they're taking in getting us into a war with them. Well, so they're the bad guys and we're the good guys. So what are you supposed to do? Give in to evil like Chamberlain at Munich? You know,
and not only that, I mean, if we're supposed to be the good guys and we're blowing up our allies' pipeline. Things like that, you know, with Nord Stream and yep. You know, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is that you look at this huge footprint that we were showing, and essentially, you know, we're being policemen of the world for generations now, it feels like. And is that really set the stage potentially for almost all of these conflicts that are happening? Because you look at like Taiwan, maybe, you know, this is a sense of government distorting all those areas in the world where maybe these people would come to different negotiations over time if we weren't there.
Think back to like the fall of the Cold War era. I mean, all of us are old enough to, you know, have lived through that time where, like, wasn't it kind of unique and weird and coincidental that the Soviet Union fell apart right about 1 decade before the turn of the millennium, right? So we had like this 10-year period for like, how's it going to be? Remember that show on the Discovery Channel, Beyond 2000? What's it going to be like on the other side of that milestone? What kind of new world are we going to build here? But Bill Clinton was driving. Right. So, you know, is absolute criminal negligence at best and a hell of a lot of killing people, you know, exploding people to death and creating enemies during that whole time, acting as though. And we got, you know, I'm working on a new book about the new Cold War with Russia now. And I got quote after quote after quote after quote of these people, a lot of times later shamedly admitting that their attitude was, what are they going to do about it? We can do whatever we want. And the Russians can cry about it, but at the end of the day, tough, because they're weak and we're strong. And that was the attitude. And so
Scott,
we can all imagine how it just did. Give me just 1 sec to wrap up that it just didn't have to be this way at all. If America had abolished NATO and just come home, and said, hey, in Europe, I mean, the Nazis are gone, the commies are gone. You guys work out a new treaty for a common security architecture. Doesn't have to have anything to do with us. I mean, remember when the Soviet Union fell, they were like, oh no, maybe Germany and Japan are going to rise back up again. Come on, we're out of enemies. Bill Hicks, the great comedian, said 30 years ago, he goes, how does it feel to see that we're the evil empire? The Soviet Union fell, and then the whole thing was just an illusion. They had no power at all. The Red Army was a joke. We're the evil empire. We always were the whole time, man. And how does it feel to just recognize that? Otherwise, spin the globe. There's no power that exists in Africa. The most powerful nation in Africa is Egypt. They don't have any power at all. They don't have a military at all. Every power in Latin America is subservient to us. There's no military force in Latin America anywhere that stands against us. So entire Western Hemisphere locked up, Africa locked up. Every nation in Europe is our friend, if not outright legal ally, right? India has no ability to project power. China doesn't really have any ability to project power. They're a very poor nation in many ways. And we got our friends in Japan and Korea and Australia. That's it. There's no lost continent of Atlantis out there. There's no like Mars attacks. Keep spinning the globe. You're back home again. That's it. We covered every continent. There are no enemies. There are no enemies. We could defend this country with a couple of good submarines, and that would be the end of that. That's what Ron Paul said in 2008. We don't need a standing military force at all.
So we should not have a standing army, is what you're saying?
Yeah, what do we need one for? We got a couple of good submarines is enough to sink any aggressive naval move towards our country by any foreign naval power, military power that would attempt to influence us, take over, create a monopoly on force anywhere on our territory. And quite frankly, one American Trident submarine can kill all of Russia. Okay, in fact, like most of Europe and Russia. One Trident submarine holds approximately 288 warheads because
we need a navy.
You can fit multiple warheads on a single rocket. So literally, one Trident sub could blow up the world, could cause nuclear winter and kill us all.
And that's
is enough to deter Russia and China and Europe and every power in the world from messing with us forever.
What And that's a great note, I guess, to end. We're just about out of time here. But Trident submarines, that's all we need.
That's right. Mom said that.
But yeah, can you bring up the visual again real quick, Leon? So again, you can check out Scott's website and his show at scotthorton.org, and you can find more information about him there. And again, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for joining us as well, Scott. And I think we got a lot out of this. And by the way, there's an excellent debate on the Soho Forum of Scott arguing with neocon Bill Kristol. So go check that out as well, too. So, but thanks again for joining us today. And until next time, stay tuned and stay free.
Yes, indeed. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.